So the big thing of this is, and I always like to tell folks, is that just the gestation of this film did not like inherently start with me. It started with Dr. Robin Armeens Coleman, who is the writer of the book, which is also entitled Horror Noir. And when she wrote the book, it then came from Ashley Blackwell, who is an amazing black woman who is very integral in the black community when it comes to horror, who said, okay, we see this. This is an amazing book. It has a lot to say. I want to try and build this out. And she ended up partnering with Stage 3 Productions, which is a production company out of New Jersey that wanted to see this pushed and, get out there. So they started building stuff out. But unfortunately, nobody was willing to pay attention or get this off the ground until after Jordan Peele won the Oscar. And that's when Shudder and AMC realized, like, oh, this is a thing. This is important. So that's when they decided to, grab on and, start building it out. And then that's when they said, okay, we want to find a director who understands this, intrinsically gets it, and wants to build out the world and understanding of what we're going to be saying to people. And that's how I came into the picture on this.
How did you settle? I mean, it really felt like we were part of the same community as the folks on the screen, sitting in these chairs. And how did you settle on that kind of structure format for the film?
So one of the things, I've always known when I was young is that, black folks, we love movies. We love to go to movies. We love to talk about movies. We love to go back and forth with the movies. And we felt like the best way to really get this across was to have something that was fun and engaging and put you in the seat alongside this rather than just being talking at you. So we felt that it was best that, we were right there in the seats, in the theater with these folks talking about this. So it felt like a more personal conversation between the film and the audience versus the audience just talking to you. And we thought that was a better way to engage.
I've been reading Dr. Coleman's book, and there's a statistic mentioned in the preface that that African Americans generate something like 25% of box office receipts, and at the same time, you would expect the market to reflect that kind of purchasing power in some way, and I was wondering if you wanted to address that in some way.
Well, I think one of the things about it is, unfortunately, because of how America is set up and how it is still a, predominantly white centered nation, that, even with black and brown people, specifically going to the movies the most, specifically generating such, huge amounts of box office, like with all things that come with our history, we're never put in the forefront and said, okay, if they're bringing us this type of revenue, let's cater to what they're thinking about. So it's just one of those things that, unfortunately, it speaks back to the fact that we end up giving so much to this nation, and we aren't ever truly, giving back much, in receiving in what we do on a regular basis.
Questions? Yes.
But I thought the format was excellent. I could understand it. I learned a lot. And even some of the shorts that you showed, I was scared as I was sitting here. I'm not a big horror fan, but I enjoyed this very much. I think you did a great job.
Thank you so much, ma'am. One of the things we wanted to make sure to do with this film was to make it as accessible as possible to anyone that was checking it out. So we wanted to make sure that not only was it something that black people could love and also horror fans could love, but we wanted it to be engaging, fun, and entertaining in a way that anybody who was coming into this and wanted to learn more about it could really engage with themselves. Because, one of the things is that, by all means, it needs to be educational. We need to understand things. We need to have the type of setup where you're learning as you're checking out everything, but we also understand that it's still a film first and foremost, and one of the most important things with any film, whether it's documentary or whether it's narrative, is for it to be engaging. And that was something that we always push, which is why we wanted to have jokes, we want to have light brevity and moments, and filter that in with also the times where we had to get serious as well. Because for me, it's never great when a documentary is just straight just very boring, very monotone. It doesn't do anything for me. And then because of the fact that, for the most part, horror noir is essentially just clips and talking heads, we had to make sure that the actual content in it was engaging and fun enough to where it would still keep you going, because in most instances, in like 99% of documentaries that kind of have this type of format, they tend to really drag at a point where you may be learning, but you're barely learning because you're about to fall asleep.
Yeah, talking head formats generally, get a bad rap or kind of falling out of favor. But this was so energized. It seemed to re-energize the whole idea of the talking head kind of documentary. I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
We have some.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Benita. I guess you definitely know what it's like to go in the hood and watch certain movies and how we sit in theater. When you go in the hood, it's not quiet when we're there because we're always commenting on what's going on in the movies, and we're always, if what we think isn't fair is going on, we speak up, and we're always talking. So a lot of times when I was a kid and we'd go to the movie theaters in the hood, we were going back and forth with the movies. I mean, if you go outside of our communities, and everyone wants you to hush and be quiet. But in our communities, we talk to the movies, and we're talking to each other. You see that? What? He's gonna do, so it would be great if you could take some of that, of how we interact with the movies, or a lot more of that. And because some of the movies we watch, as you're saying, from a Black perspective, we're like, I can't believe they did that. And we've always, I know growing up in the Bronx, and then, we'd go to the movie theater and go, we would talk back to the theaters and to the movie as it's going and say, why is this going on? Or this is really crazy, or what fool would do that, so.
No, it's a great point. Like, one of the things that I brought up before is like one of the reasons why we went with this format with, feeling like we're talking to you, the audience, is because, for me, growing up in Mississippi and Alabama, when, you went to the theater, when all your friends, you're enjoying yourself, you're talking back to it. Like, you're saying, like, if you see something that's crazy that's going on, you're like, yo, that's not what's up. And, it's a real conversation. It's an added benefit and added funness to seeing films and movies in that type of way. And that's something I wanted to make sure was felt, within horror noir as you're watching it. And the one thing I've always appreciated above all else with folks saying, like, it's you understand it, you're learning from it, but the big thing that I've heard a lot is that, like, I just had fun. I enjoyed checking out this film, and that for me is like one of the most important things that came out of it. So thank you.
Hi, good evening. First of all, I want to commend you on your direction for this film, because I'm a really big horror movie fan. I'm a very big Halloween, spooky kind of feel fan. And I remember I was having a conversation with someone, and we were saying how we want more plots with Black women playing vampires and playing all these supernatural roles outside of voodoo priestesses. And after watching the documentary, I realized that's already happened. I just wasn't very familiar with them. So my question is, are you planning to make any films inspired by this documentary? Like any films like horror or supernatural-esque now that you've done this documentary?
Well, one of the great things that's happened is ever since I did horror noir, I've had more than enough executives and people in the industry asking, like, do you want to do horror? Would you like to do a horror? And it's like, of course I would. Like, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this in the first place. How could you think otherwise? And, because of that, me and my, team, we've been like out there pitching, different horror ideas that either I'm working on with someone or I've been like, bringing up myself. So, that's all happening right now. And the big thing for me is, I want the horror that I work on to essentially, I've done this, I know the tropes, and I want to be able to subvert them in a lot of ways. And that means seeing us not only to be in the vehicles that are pushing the story forward, but also making sure that we as Black folks are not in the same tropes that we see on a regular basis. Because, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to me and any other Black person, what we should be doing with horror noir now is like pushing it into a form where we are telling the stories in a way that feels authentic and honest to ourselves, and that also means making sure that we're not falling into the same stereotypes that we've seen over and over again throughout these decades. So, just for example, one of the ones I'm working on right now is a sci-fi horror, specifically about a black family who's fighting against aliens when they steal their nephew because the aliens are using the skin of people to survive on Earth, which is wacky, it's weird, and it's over the top. And we've been getting a lot of answers where it's like, what is this? And I'm like, this is where I want to go next. So the only thing I can hope for at this point is that they're going to be open and hear what I'm trying to do and trying to go in this different and new direction with horror, because I especially love sci-fi horror and things to that degree. So, hopefully in the next, 1 to 2, 3, 4 decade, you'll see something coming out with my name on it. We'll see what's up.
Film business is tough for anyone, and particularly tough for filmmakers of color. We've got some young people in the audience. We met with some young people this afternoon. Would you encourage people you care about to get into the film business, or would you discourage them? Would you give them, words of caution, or?
So this is what I'll say, and I'll be, completely transparent about it. Like, the film business and breaking into the film industry is a business of affluence, in the sense that more often than not, the individuals who are able to get the chances that you see on a regular basis tend to either come from families that have nepotism, that have already been in the business, or have the generational wealth to where they don't have to worry about anything else and they can just focus on this. Now, I'm never going to say that's wrong on their part to go into it, but what that ends up generating is a lot of films that are very stuck away from the reality of most individuals. Like, I think the funniest thing I always think is, you'll see a movie, it's a romantic comedy, and it's someone, this beautiful white woman living in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York, and it's like, that's not real by any means. But that's one of the things that I say, that like, we need more black and brown and also poor people, like, coming from places where they didn't have that same affluence to come into the industry, because that's the only way we're going to get perspectives that are different than what we're getting on a regular basis, and we're going to get perspectives that don't feel like they're within a bubble. But the thing I have to be very honest about is, even with me right now, I'm from the Deep South. My family doesn't, they never had that much, but I will never ever say that I didn't have a lot of blessings through it. But the whole thing about it is, like, they don't have any power, infrastructural power within the industry. So it's really me just starting off at the very bottom and trying to build myself up there. And it's always going to be an uphill battle, like, by all means. So I say this to say that, as black and brown filmmakers, poor filmmakers, wherever you're coming from, if you want to do this, you need to be ready and understand that it's not going to be fair, and that it could take you 5 years, it could take you a decade. You never know how long, and there's always going to be individuals who aren't as talented as you who are going to get more opportunities because they have the connections and the wealth that affords them that. Now, this isn't for me to say that you shouldn't go into it, but I just want you to understand that if you make that choice and you want to push this, you need to be ready for what it means to be black and brown in the industry.
What's the value? Oh, okay, we've got, yeah.
I know you're tired of seeing me, my fault. Have my friend here, he is white. So one of the movies that inspired us was a movie called Funny Games, and one of my criticisms was that, similar to, I forgot who the woman in the film was, but the family was essentially dumb. And I'm glad that, I believe it was the woman who was in the craft said, when black people watch horror, similar to what, I forgot the lady's name, when we usually watch it, it's like, we wouldn't do that because, like, we know better. What do you think allows for that type of insight as a black person watch a horror that will allow us to view a film with a different lens from our white counterparts?
Well, I think one of the interesting things, and the one thing I've noticed specifically with horror, and this, what you brought up, is that characters in horror tend to make really dumb decisions a lot. And I'm not sure why. Well, I know exactly why. It's because the writer doesn't know how to move the story along without them doing something dumb, so they make them do dumb. So they're not thinking about the character first. They're thinking about plot first. So because they push plot first, that means that the characters are going to be doing things that don't make any sense to who they are or what they've built. And intrinsically, with black folks, because of everything we've gone through, because of the fact that we have to constantly be thinking about what we do day in and day out to make sure that we're safe, that we intrinsically will notice when someone in a film, especially a horror, does something really stupid that just doesn't make any sense. And I think that's really like a dividing line right there. Because of our lived experience, because we understand America and what it truly is, and because we always have to be walking around thinking about what can happen to us if we make a specific mistake, more often than not, especially in horror, because of how extreme it is, because it's so extreme, the decisions that are made in it are extreme, and because a lot of times it's plot over character, they make very dumb decisions, and we notice and we're like, yo, nobody's gonna keep on walking towards the monster when he's... The one thing I cannot stand is when you have a horror film, the Jason or Freddy or whoever it is just walking real slow. They're walking real slow, and the person, they're sprinting, they're running, they're just looking back like this, and then somehow they hit a stump and just fall over, and it feels like they sit down there for about 10 seconds before they get up and start running again. And I will never for the life of me understand that. And just for me personally, what I've tried to do is, I've been writing horrors, I've been writing any type of film, is to always think about the character first and what they would do, who they are in their character. So if you build out a character, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little off topic, but you just, for writers, anybody here who writes, always think about character first when you're building out your stuff. Think about what your character that you built out, whoever you base it on, or if you read it, think about what they would actually do in a situation. Don't think about where you need the plot to go. Allow your characters to be the one that writes the plot versus the plot writing the character. And intrinsically, if you do that, you will end up having a more honest film, because it will feel like they actually made decisions versus the writer telling them what to do. And I think that's also a very good indicator of when you see a good horror versus a bad horror. Like, the thing that always reminds me when I watch Get Out on a regular basis is that, as far as I'm concerned, he didn't make the greatest mistake. I mean, all of the things that were the best. But one thing always reminded me was that he was there, he was knocked out, he's sitting there and he's kind of picking out the cotton out of there. And of course, that's specifically, we brought up again that's like a symbolic thing about people picking cotton nuts and doing that, but he takes that and puts it in his ears to not be able to hear it. And I remember afterwards the planning payoff and realizing it, and I was like, wow, that's really smart. And it kind of blew my mind, because on a regular basis we just don't get that in horror. So just overall, answering your question, understanding that we intrinsically understand the world, so we know when something's really dumb. On the same route, if you are a writer, always think about your characters first, so your characters just don't make dumb decisions because you need it to happen for your story.
That's a great answer. What about film school? Was that a valuable experience? Would you recommend that, or?
Oh man. So, as you may or may not know, I went to USC School of Cinematic Arts. It is considered, one of the best schools that you can go to in the world. And I am 100% thankful for the understandings, the lessons, the teachers and the mentors and all the colleagues that I got there. I would not have gotten horror noir or be pushing my career if I hadn't have met all the people I met at that point. But something I always have to be very honest about is it's a lot of debt. It just is, and you can't get around it. And unfortunately, more often than not, these schools know that and prey on that fact to make sure that they can make as much money as possible from students coming into these programs. So while I got so much out of it, and I am truly appreciative, and I wouldn't be the filmmaker I am without it. And I'll say this, if you're willing to take on a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot of money to hone your craft, then you just need to be willing to understand the consequences of it. I don't regret my decision, but I also understand the implications it has for my life forward. which is why I'm so, a big proponent of seeing, schools, specifically colleges, become, free or as affordable as possible. Because as far as I'm concerned, anyone who wants to go to school, you should not be punished with overwhelming debt for wanting to get an education in the first place.
So the question I had first, let me just thank you. You did a remarkable job with that documentary. It took me back, and I was able to reflect on all those films that I kind of grew up watching. The question I have for you is particularly with Get Out. And I think it's been a resurgence that I've seen with a lot of different actors today who are playing in prominent roles, but as it relates to horror films, one of the things that I did see a lot online in conversations is that a lot of these movies are being afforded to British black actors as opposed to American black actors who have a particular lived experience that probably would have given a little bit more credence to that role. But I wanted your take on looking at horror films and needing more black and brown representation on film. What is your take on more sort of black British actors playing a lot of roles of black Americans in cinema?
That's interesting. So, I'll be very candid about it. I understand the fact that, overall, on an overall black understanding with, all black people, that it's hard in general to get these roles and get these, get to that level. And while I am very, very for me, it's like, the big thing for me is like, I want to see, actually, here's the best way I'll put it. My bigger problem is usually when I'll see something where a non-black American actor or actress is taking on a role that is intrinsically black American. So, one of the big thing that's been happening, that's been controversy, is the black British actress who's playing Harriet Tubman. And, that's been a big, back and forth about it. And, on a personal level, I'm never going to, I'm not going to come after her. I'm not going to, be mean or anything like that. But, for that one, for example, I truly do believe that it should have been a black American actress, just because we need more representation within that as well. But it's a complicated issue in the sense that, we've also had things where we've seen a lot of black American actors who have gone and played in roles in other movies that weren't necessarily like black American or specifically African. So it's a back and forth thing, and I'm not sure of the answer, because I know for me specifically, if the role demands that it's a black American with our lived experience, then I want a black American. But I also have to admit that I can't put my own parameters around another filmmaker and the choices that they make. So it's interesting, because this is one of those things that I'm not absolutely sure what the correct answer is in all instances. I know for me, I know what I would do. If it's black American, I wrote a black American, I want it to be black American. But at the same time, if another director wants to have someone that they think is stronger and is still black, I will take it, and I'm gonna check it out, and I still want to support regardless. And here's the big thing I will say, that is the number one thing for me. If it's going to be someone who is not black American and who is coming in and taking on a role as a black American, I just hope and pray that that individual has never been anti-black American, who has never disparaged us or looked down on us. That is where, for me, it feels unfair more than anything else. And let me just add and just say, that's all I can give. I wish I had a better answer on this one, but it's a really complicated issue, and I'm not even sure how to even go about it in a lot of ways.
I just want to say congratulations with directing the film, and you did a really very good job. And I was wondering, how old are you? But that wasn't my main question. My main question was there a particular film where the African American or the black character's role in the film motivated you to to direct this film, out of the many films that were discussed in the documentary?
Okay, so yeah, I can use you with two things on that. So first, I'm 29. Second, for me, because there's many different parts of the film that are equally important. But the one that really stuck out to me was William Crane, who did Blacula. I remember sitting down and talking to him before we really got into it. And, he's still alive. He's still doing his thing. He's healthy, and he still wants to make more films and stuff like that. I believe right now he's in his either 70s or 80s. But what stuck out to me was the fact that he made Blacula in the early 1970s, and he was 23 years old at that point. And you have to keep in mind that, most big blockbuster films, most filmmakers who get to that point, they're in their either 30s, late 30s, even 40s, for that. So for him to be basically taken on was probably one of the biggest films of the early 70s is absolutely unprecedented. But if you actually take out the time to go on his IMDb and look him up, because you would think after doing something that huge, his career would have just soared from there. But in actuality, he talked about it as well, that, not only did he get pushed back from his white counterparts who did not like the fact that he was the director on a film about black folks, but also he, in a lot of ways, got blackballed for his success. And what it made me realize was that without a William Crane, there isn't an Ava DuVernay, there isn't a Ryan Coogler, there isn't so many of these, there isn't a Spike Lee, there isn't a me. So I am enraged and mad at the fact that he didn't get to have the career he deserved because of how talented he was. But at the same time, it made me realize that I'm so thankful that he still pushed and got this film and made it in his own way, because without the contributions that he did at that time, there wouldn't have been anything, or we might have even had the black filmmakers that we have right now. So for me, that's probably, for me on a personal level, that's the most important piece that really pushed me.
Thank you for the film. I'm an archaeologist that studies the influence, and some of the things I study is the influence of fear on culture. And so I have this idea generally that I talk to my students a lot about when I'm teaching these things, is that there's this, you're not going to be able to understand a culture by just looking at their accomplishments, but you'll understand them much better by looking at what they fear. And so I think your film captures that. I mean, I think you show this history of kind of fear in our culture as it's reflected in your film, and it's really great. And I'm wondering, I have kind of a couple of questions. One of them is, do you see then in that kind of context this fluorescence like that Jordan Peele is having, where is that maybe a signal of hope that our fears are being transformed a bit, or in some ways? And my other question is, are there filmmakers now that that we should be keeping our eye on in terms of tapping into those kind of things?
Good question. So, if the idea that Get Out brings a significance of hope of change, I would personally say no, in the sense that you see how the country's going right now and what's happening with it. And Get Out is a direct understanding of that, because Get Out is a critique on how white spaces and white people will exploit black bodies. Specifically, that's the whole point of them finding these guys. And it's funny because we think of it as horror, but Get Out is actually sci-fi horror, because even though we don't talk about it, they don't really get into it. It's specifically about them performing brain surgery and taking out brains and putting it into someone else, so to where these white people can extend their lives in black bodies. So that's inherently a critique of what's happening right now. In a lot of ways, and why it might not be as blatant as that, is still being pushed out. And while I think that there is hope in the sense that we're still seeing black and brown communities, progressive leftist communities fighting, we're also seeing such a resurgence in white supremacy and far right understandings. And it's scary at this point, because as far as I'm concerned, folks talk about, we've, overcome, we've done so much better. But I constantly ask myself, is this any different than the 60s? So I think there is a change in the sense that we are seeing more filmmakers like Jordan being able to get their voice out there. And that's a beautiful thing. But if you look at the overall landscape of America, I would honestly say it's getting worse. And then, what was your second question again? Okay, great. So, for example, like, two of them were in there, like, the two black women that you saw, the younger black woman, you should look out for them. One of them is Miyosha Bean, and she's amazing. She's doing lots. She's literally just churning out short horrors on a regular basis. And, I keep up with her on a regular basis because I want to see what she's doing as well. So, we're going back and forth on that. I think it's blanking on me right now, but it's one of my homeboys who did the last Purge, or is it the first Purge that came out? His black man decided to come on that, and he's someone that I want to see more horror from on a regular basis. We also have the black woman director who's going to be right now she's writing and she's directing the reboot or the soft remake of CANDYMAN. And I think she's someone that we should keep up with on a regular basis. But, to be completely honest with you, when it comes in the horror landscape, for the most part right now, like, it's Jordan, and he's doing great. And he's trying his best to pull people up by all means. But so many of the individuals who are trying to do black horror are still struggling to get it out there because it's still a white infrastructure in the sense that the folks who are financiers who can greenlight your films are still majority white. And it was just a truly blessed situation that Monkey Paw and Blumhouse came together to make it out. And these white infrastructures and these white financiers understand that Get Out did well, but they don't necessarily understand why. So while they're saying we want more black horror, they don't necessarily want it through a black lens as Get Out did, which means that there's still a struggle to actually get our films out there from our own perspective. So it's still an uphill battle. Like, one of the funniest things I always talk about is I made this documentary and I still have people who will fight me about what horror noir actually means. And it's like you're talking to somebody who is intrinsically a part of it. So it lets you know that, there's still so much work to do when it comes to black and brown filmmakers actually getting their voice out in a way that doesn't like whitewash it.
You're 29, but are you experiencing a kind of generation gap with a younger generation that is growing up with a completely different kind of media diet than nurtured you?
So I'll say the funniest thing, when we went today to the high school and talked to them, and they're telling me how, like, yeah, we're watching Hulu and Netflix in the school, and I'm like, what? Like, they allow y'all to do that? Like, I'll give a better example. I talked to the kids, and I said, yo, how many of y'all seen CANDYMAN? And a few of them raised their hands, and like, how many of y'all know Tony Todd? And nobody raised their hand. I'm like, how do you watch CANDYMAN and not realize who Tony Todd is in the first place? Like, that's crazy. Like, there is specifically like a gap at this point where, it's kind of a tipping point where, from Get Out and onward is this new understanding of black horror to a degree. And then, from there, and you go backwards, like, of course, a lot of folks still know things, they might know Tales from the Hood, they might know CANDYMAN, they might know, like, a couple of these films that, we went through and saw, but, even me, when I was talking to this predominantly, black and brown kids at this school, I guess the greatest example was like, when I talked about blaxploitation, I specifically said, how many of y'all know who Shaft is? And none of them did. And that was just like, oh my God. And, it's not, and even for me, like, I'm 29, I wasn't even born when Shaft was big, but I at least understood it. So there's still a huge gap because so much of not only black horror, but just black cinema in general really isn't taught and put out there. So, when I'm in there talking to them, and I'm talking about Spencer Williams and Oscar Micheaux and what they were doing in the early 1900s, making black films and black horror all the way back then, they have no idea who those people are. And I said, okay, Andy and Amos, and that was my bad, because how the hell are these kids gonna know what Andy and Amos is in the first place? So yeah, there's a very, very huge gap right there, and I don't know how to fix it, because, just in general, we need to actually know and learn more about our cinematic history, but I think it's also important for these young black kids to also know the history of their people, within all things, but especially within horror, because the point of horror noir was to say that we've always been there in the first place. We just weren't given the recognition that we deserved.